So Louis Theroux Savile documentary a couple of weeks ago when I tweeted I'd seen this, a lot of people were really confused, and I always forget that people don't follow TV listings and things as much as the three of us do. So they're like, how can he do a new one? He's been dead years. So, you may remember a few
Was
years
it
ago...
just like that?
It was like that. It was like, in 2000, Louis Theroux met Jimmy Savile as part of his Louis Meets series, and it was a truly bizarre documentary. And because he didn't feel like he got to the bottom of who Jimmy Savile really was, he kept meeting up with him. They struck up a bizarre friendship. He had a lot of extra footage ready for another documentary. Jimmy Savile then died. All these stories came out, and it made Louis Theroux himself question why he was unable to get to the bottom of it, and why he didn't see what we all know now when he met him several times in public. And then he went out and spoke to some victims and some people who were in complete denial about the allegations levelled at Jimmy Savile and all the rest of it. I found it interesting. It was hard going. It was the longest Louis documentary for a long time. My favourite bits were all of the extra footage, particularly the uncomfortable scene in the BBC offices where Jimmy Savile just undresses in front of all those young girls and makes them feel very uncomfortable. There was also a scene where Louis appears oblivious at a restaurant table while Jimmy Savile sort of fondles and hugs a woman and her daughter, and also the uncomfortable exchanges between Louis and Jimmy's PR and the woman who's got a load of Jimmy Savile... PA, sorry, yeah, and a woman who's got a load of Jimmy Savile stuff in her house and is worried about showing it all off. I don't know. I mean, Louis Theroux stuff just gets better and better. I always like it when the tables get turned on him, because the lady at the very end who was abused.
Well, I felt
not only by Savile but by a lot of people. Were you groomed? Yeah.
Do you feel like you were groomed by him?
I felt he was overly harsh on himself, and it felt more like a documentary about him than it did Jimmy Savile at times.
Oh, I don't
disagree.
Well, I don't know.
I think I know what Gary's talking about to an extent. I'll just throw my two cents in. That I just felt there was too much at one time. There was almost like three things going. There was like the clips from old show. We were sort of like things about the abuse case, and then going to meet these other people. And it just felt like he had all these ideas since all the allegations came out and everything was found out, that he wanted to get everything out in this like hour and 15 minutes, and it almost felt like an overload of information. Usually I find Louis' documentaries are really well paced, but I just felt there was too much going on, and maybe that's because he's got such a personal attachment to it, and that's why you're saying that, too hard on himself, because it felt like this was his most personal piece because of his attachment to Savile, and because he's obviously been thinking about this for the last 4 years, what he can do with this.
I also liked him asking the victims, as it were, whether they'd seen his original documentary and what they'd made of it.
And that's why I felt that he was more analysing his... I mean, he seemed very much to be kind of saying, how was I so duped? But to be fair to Louis, we all were. That, from the 1960s onwards, it was everybody was duped by this man.
And there was two women who still failed to believe it. The former PA, as you said, just didn't believe it at all. She was like, no.
There was one element of it that I don't know whether anyone picked up on. It was very quick and glossed over quite quickly, but it really interested me. There was a moment where Louis said that Jimmy had got hold of his personal address and phone number.
Yeah, even though he was ex-directory.
Which was ex-directory. And for me, it just said, look, this guy's really well connected. And it actually made me think of the most recent series of Line of Duty, because I'm a TV obsessive.
Yeah.
And just going back to how intricate this circle of people is, and just wondering whether when you were famous back then, the influence and the power that somebody like that had.
People would use that to their advantage, though, this idea of him being connected. The story around the injury unit, where basically they were like ready to be in ruin, and they rang him and said, what can you do? And he said, leave it with me. So people were quite happy to use that kind of like ability when it suited them.
And he'd
but
seen that
then were quite shocked
hospital.
when he used it for and then shocked when he used that influence to seemingly further his own, deplorable actions.
He'd seen that girl's hospital records as well, which is not something
Yeah.
he should have been privy to, really.
Absolutely.
But it